As the days went by, Sarah's thoughts about Emma grew more intense. The envy she had felt before was starting to turn into something darker, something she couldn't ignore any longer. At first, it was just small thoughts, moments when she'd find herself imagining what it would be like to be Emma, to live her life. But soon, those thoughts started to take over her mind. It was almost as if she couldn't help it. Every time she saw Emma's happy family or heard her talk about her perfect life, it only fueled the fire inside her. She began to wonder what it would take to step into Emma's shoes. Sarah's husband, Mark, was a good man, but their relationship had slowly become strained over the years. He had grown distant, and she felt like he no longer paid attention to her the way he used to. He was wrapped up in his work, and their communication was down to the basics, talking about the kids, bills, and the usual day-to-day stuff. It was clear to Sarah that something was missing. The spark they once shared had faded. Meanwhile, Emma's husband, Ryan, was the opposite. From Sarah's perspective, Ryan was everything Mark wasn't. He was attentive, always there for Emma, and seemed to genuinely care about every little detail of her life. Ryan would surprise Emma with little gifts, cook dinner on special occasions, and always spoke with admiration about her. To Sarah, it seemed like Ryan truly appreciated Emma in a way that Mark no longer did. The more Sarah observed, the more she couldn't help but compare Ryan's love for Emma with Mark's indifference toward her. At first, Sarah didn't think much of it. She was still in the phase of feeling dissatisfied with her own life, but she didn't want to act on it. However, over time, as she spent more time with Emma and Ryan, often visiting their home for gatherings, she began to notice the subtle ways Ryan would look at her. His gaze was warm, friendly, but there was something more in the way he spoke to her. At times, Sarah would catch him giving her a smile that lingered just a little too long, and it made her uncomfortable. But Sarah didn't want to acknowledge it at first. She told herself she was imagining things. Maybe Ryan was just being polite, or maybe she was reading too much into it. But as their interactions continued, something changed. Ryan began to open up to her more, telling her about the challenges in his life, his struggles at work, and even confiding in her about his marriage. He started to make Sarah feel like she was the one who understood him in ways that no one else did. There were moments when she thought she could feel the attraction between them, though she tried to shake the thought away. She reminded herself that he was married to Emma, and that she couldn't possibly interfere in their relationship. But Sarah wasn't the same person she used to be. She wasn't the content, happy woman who could accept her own life for what it was. Now she saw the opportunity, and she started to entertain the idea of taking it. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. It started with little things, like how Ryan would compliment her or find ways to spend more time with her. But gradually, Sarah began to see a way forward. She could be the one Ryan turned to. She could be the woman who received the affection, the attention, and the admiration that Emma always seemed to get. And maybe, just maybe, if she played her cards right, she could step into Emma's place entirely. Sarah knew it wouldn't happen overnight. She would need to be careful, to make sure she didn't reveal too much of her intentions. But now, in the back of her mind, a plan was forming. It was the beginning of something that would change everything. The tension between Sarah and Emma reached a boiling point one afternoon, when Sarah invited Emma over to her house for a casual chat. It was meant to be just another visit, one of those conversations where they'd laugh about old memories and discuss their families. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. She had started to see Emma not as the friend she had known for years, but as a competitor, a barrier between her and the life she now craved. As they sat in Sarah's living room, the conversation started innocently enough. They talked about their kids, the house renovations Sarah was planning, and how busy both of them had been. Emma, as usual, seemed perfectly happy. She smiled and laughed, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside Sarah. But every word Emma spoke only seemed to fuel Sarah's resentment. Sarah couldn't stop comparing herself to Emma. How could she not? Emma had everything: her husband's love, a family that adored her, and a life that looked perfect to anyone on the outside. Then, in the midst of the conversation, Emma said something that struck Sarah like a slap in the face. "Ryan and I were talking the other night about how lucky we are. We have everything we could ever want. It's just so nice to know we're in this together." Sarah froze. The words hung in the air like a weight. It wasn't just the statement itself that bothered her. It was the way Emma said it, so casually, as if everything about her life was secure, perfect, and unbreakable. Sarah couldn't help but feel a rush of jealousy and anger. Why did Emma get to have everything? Why did she deserve such a perfect life while Sarah's felt like it was falling apart? Before she could stop herself, the words escaped her mouth. "You're lucky. I wish I could have what you have," Sarah said, her voice quieter than usual. Emma, of course, didn't notice the underlying tone of bitterness in Sarah's voice. She smiled sympathetically. "I know things have been tough for you and Mark," Emma said, "but things will get better. You two just need some time together." But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She was lost in her own thoughts, her mind swirling with anger and desire. She had to admit it. She didn't want time to fix her marriage with Mark. She didn't want to fix anything. She wanted to take it all. The life Emma had, the attention Emma received, and the love of Emma's husband. All of it. The conversation with Emma ended sooner than Sarah had expected, and Emma left with her usual warm goodbye, completely unaware of what had just transpired. But as Sarah watched her friend walk away, a new plan began to form in her mind. She had spent so many years being Emma's friend, being the supportive one, the one who was always there. But now she was tired of being in the shadows. She was ready to take what she wanted. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about everything that had happened. The quiet way Ryan had spoken to her in the past, the way he had made her feel special, seen, and important. Things she hadn't felt in a long time. And then there was Emma's life. Her perfect marriage, her perfect family. It was all so close, yet so out of reach. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of clarity. She knew what she had to do. She would get closer to Ryan, find ways to draw him in, make him notice her in ways he never had before. She would step into Emma's world, and she would take it. The more she thought about it, the more the idea consumed her. There was no turning back now. Sarah had crossed a line, and she was ready to make her move. The days after Emma's visit were strange for Sarah. It was as if a shift had occurred, something that couldn't be undone. The words they had exchanged, the way Sarah had felt, every moment of that conversation replayed in her mind. Sarah knew that Emma had no idea what was brewing inside her. Emma would never guess that her seemingly perfect life had become the very thing Sarah wanted to destroy. Sarah began spending more time with Ryan, but it wasn't obvious. At first, it seemed innocent enough. She would see him at the neighborhood parties, during gatherings with friends, and sometimes when she visited Emma. They would chat about casual topics, work, the weather, the kids, but Sarah's mind was always focused on something else. Every word Ryan spoke, every glance he gave, was like a sign. She could feel the connection growing, little by little. Ryan, for his part, didn't seem to notice how things were changing. Or maybe he didn't want to. He was still grieving the loss of his close relationship with Emma, the warmth that had once filled their home. He would talk about Emma's perfection in a way that made Sarah feel like an outsider. "Emma is amazing," Ryan would say. "She always knows how to make everyone feel special." But with every word, Sarah could feel a small opening. Ryan was not talking to Emma like he used to. His words had a sense of distance, almost as if he was realizing that his perfect wife was not as flawless as he had once believed. And that was where Sarah saw her opportunity. It began with small compliments. At first, she told Ryan how well he was doing at work, how much she admired his commitment to his family. She was careful, though, never too obvious. Her words were just enough to plant a seed. Every time she saw Ryan, she made sure to highlight his strengths, to make him feel special in ways he hadn't been made to feel in a long time. The more Sarah flattered him, the more Ryan seemed to enjoy their conversations. He began seeking her out, looking for her approval. He didn't realize it, of course, but he was slowly becoming more drawn to her. Sarah could see it in the way he looked at her, the way he smiled when she complimented him. It was subtle, but Sarah could tell that Ryan was beginning to notice her in a way he never had before. One evening, when they were alone at a party, Sarah found herself standing next to Ryan at the edge of the group. Emma was talking to some of the other guests, and Sarah took the opportunity to speak to Ryan again. She kept the conversation light, but this time, she steered it in a different direction. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked casually, her voice soft. Ryan hesitated for a moment, as though he was unsure whether to share his feelings. But then, as if the question had unlocked something in him, he began talking about the tension he had been feeling with Emma. He mentioned how the spark seemed to have gone out of their relationship, how they had stopped having deep conversations, and how Emma had become distant in her own way. For the first time, Sarah saw an opening, a crack in the armor that Emma had built around her life. Ryan was no longer just Emma's perfect husband. He was a man who needed someone to listen to him, someone who could see beyond the surface of his life. And Sarah, with her carefully crafted words and subtle gestures, was becoming that person. It was clear to Sarah now. She wasn't just talking to Ryan anymore. She was slowly becoming the woman he turned to, the one who saw him for who he really was. And with each passing day, Sarah grew more certain that the life she had been craving, the life Emma had, was within her grasp. She could feel it. The more she spent time with Ryan, the more she knew she could take Emma's place. But she had to be patient. This was just the beginning, and Sarah was ready to do whatever it took to make it happen. The more time Sarah spent with Ryan, the more she began to feel like her plan was taking shape. She was becoming the woman Ryan turned to, the one he confided in. But she knew that taking Emma's place wouldn't be easy. It wasn't just about getting closer to Ryan. It was about removing any obstacles in her way. And the biggest one was Emma's son, James. James was a reminder of everything Sarah didn't have. He was a constant presence in the house, always a part of the life that Emma had built. Sarah had seen how close Emma and James were, how much love Emma poured into raising her son. It wasn't that Sarah hated James. It was more that he represented something she couldn't have. He had his mother's love, her attention, her care. To Sarah, it felt like something was always missing in her own life, and James's presence reminded her of what she wanted but couldn't grasp. James was a good kid, polite, hardworking, and respectful. But Sarah wasn't concerned with how good he was. She was concerned with how much he was tied to Emma's life. Every time he walked into the room, he was like a shadow, reminding her of the things she would never have unless she removed him. And so, as she spent more time with Ryan, she began to subtly work on creating distance between him and his son. At first, it was small things. Sarah would casually bring up how difficult it must be for Ryan to balance his attention between work, Emma, and James. She would talk about how important it was for a family to focus on each other and not let outside influences get in the way. Ryan listened, nodding at first, unsure of what Sarah was really trying to say. But slowly her words began to settle into his mind. He started to see his son's growing independence as something that was taking him away from the family. Ryan had always been proud of James, but now he couldn't help but notice the tension in their relationship. James was growing older, becoming more independent, and was spending more time away from the family. Ryan began to feel like his son didn't need him as much anymore. Sarah, knowing exactly what Ryan was thinking, encouraged him to focus more on his marriage and his future with her. She would suggest things like taking a trip away from the house, just the two of them, to reconnect. She spoke of how important it was to strengthen their bond, something that only Emma could provide in her own way. At the same time, she would make small remarks about how James seemed so distant, almost as if he didn't need his father anymore. She wasn't being cruel, but she was planting seeds, creating doubt in Ryan's mind about his relationship with his son. Then it happened. One evening, Ryan sat down with James and had a long talk. James had been spending more time with his friends lately, and Ryan was starting to feel left behind. The conversation didn't go well. James, always the independent one, didn't understand why his father seemed so concerned. Ryan felt rejected, and the distance between them seemed to grow even more. Sarah, ever watchful, saw this as her moment. When Ryan came home later that evening, looking tired and frustrated, she was there to comfort him. She listened to him with sympathy, offering advice on how he could move forward. She spoke about how important it was for a family to stay united and not let things like distance and misunderstanding get in the way. As she spoke, she could see Ryan's appreciation for her growing. He began to rely on her more, and in turn, she grew closer to him. Sarah knew that the time had come for James to leave. She had planted the seeds, and now it was only a matter of time before Ryan would see that his son was a reminder of a life he no longer wanted to live. James was slowly being pushed out, not by force, but by a combination of Ryan's growing frustration and Sarah's gentle influence. She had become the woman Ryan looked to for comfort and support, and James, no matter how good he was, just didn't fit into that picture anymore. As the weeks went by, Sarah began to notice the subtle changes in Ryan. It was becoming clear that his focus was shifting. He had started spending more time with her, away from his responsibilities at home, and their connection was deepening. But even though she felt like things were progressing in her favor, there was still something lingering in the background: doubt. Ryan was still connected to Emma, still had ties to his past life, and Sarah knew she had to be careful not to push him too far, too fast. One evening, Ryan came over to Sarah's house after a long day at work. He seemed distant, troubled, as if something was weighing on his mind. They sat in the living room, sipping on coffee, and Sarah noticed the frustration in his expression. He looked like he was carrying a heavy burden, one that he wasn't sure how to unload. "It's just been tough lately," Ryan admitted, rubbing his temple. "Emma and we haven't been communicating like we used to. It's like we're just going through the motions, you know. We've got this house, the kids, everything we need, but something feels off." Sarah knew that this was her moment. She had to be delicate but firm, guiding him in a way that made him see her as the solution, not the problem. She reached out and gently touched his arm, offering him a reassuring smile. "It sounds like you're not being heard," Sarah said softly. "Sometimes, in long marriages, people start to forget what brought them together in the first place. They get caught up in life and forget to connect with each other on a deeper level. Maybe Emma's feeling the same way. Maybe you both just need to rediscover each other." Ryan nodded, taking in her words, but Sarah could see that the seed had already been planted. She wasn't just telling him what he wanted to hear. She was giving him a way to see his marriage from a different perspective. She was showing him that there was more out there, more than just Emma, more than the life he had built. She was subtly suggesting that maybe it wasn't too late to look for happiness somewhere else, with someone who understood him in ways that Emma no longer did. Over the next few days, Ryan's attitude began to shift. He became more distant from Emma, spending less time with her and more with Sarah. They would go out for walks, talk about their shared interests, and spend hours discussing everything from their childhoods to their hopes for the future. Slowly, but surely, Ryan began to open up to Sarah in ways he hadn't done with Emma in years. He confided in her about his frustrations with Emma, his worries about their future, and how lost he felt in the routine of his life. Sarah was always there, listening attentively, offering the comfort and support he was craving. But even though Sarah could sense that Ryan was falling deeper into her orbit, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the guilt that was beginning to creep in. She had seen the look on Emma's face when they were all together, the way Emma's eyes would light up when she talked about Ryan. Sarah knew that Emma had no idea what was happening behind her back. Emma still saw her as the friend she trusted, the one who would always be there for her. Sarah knew she was betraying that trust, but the desire to have Emma's life, to take what had always seemed out of reach, was stronger than the guilt. It wasn't just about Ryan anymore. It was about everything. About the perfect family, the perfect marriage, the life Sarah had always dreamed of, but could never achieve. And as Ryan started to lean on her more and more, Sarah realized that she was no longer just a friend. She was something else now, something more. But just as Sarah thought she was getting closer to her goal, she noticed something that made her pause. It was a brief moment, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. Ryan had started to pull away just slightly. He was still spending time with her, but there was a hesitation in his actions, a reluctance in his voice. Sarah knew that if she wasn't careful, she could lose him, just like she had lost so many things in her life. She couldn't let that happen. She had worked too hard, played the role too perfectly. Now, more than ever, she needed Ryan to be hers. The tension in the house was thick, and Sarah could feel it. It wasn't just between her and Emma anymore. Now there was a growing distance between Sarah and Ryan. At first, she thought it was just a temporary thing, a momentary hesitation, maybe even a natural part of his adjustment. But as the days passed, she realized that it was something more. Ryan wasn't as sure about their relationship as he once seemed. Sarah couldn't help but notice how he began pulling away slightly. Their conversations, once filled with warmth and comfort, were becoming more distant. Ryan's smiles seemed forced, and he spent more time alone, thinking things over. He was starting to question everything: his marriage, his future, and even his connection with Sarah. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was just that the weight of the situation was sinking in. He had been so caught up in his own emotions, in his need to feel understood, that he hadn't truly looked at the bigger picture. Sarah knew that if she didn't act fast, she could lose him. She had worked so hard to get this far, to step into the life she had always wanted. She couldn't let everything slip away now. But the more Ryan pulled back, the more Sarah realized that she needed to take things into her own hands. She had to make sure that he saw things the way she wanted him to see them. One evening, when they were sitting together in the living room, Sarah decided to confront him. She couldn't wait any longer for things to fall into place on their own. Ryan had been quiet all evening, his mind clearly elsewhere. Sarah took a deep breath and finally spoke. "Ryan, I can tell something is on your mind. You've been distant lately, and I just want to know what's going on," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. Ryan looked at her for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He had been holding everything inside, unsure of how to handle the conflicting emotions he was feeling. Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes, and it made her heart race. She knew this was the moment that would either make or break everything. "I don't know," Ryan said quietly. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I've been so focused on what's been missing in my life, on how I feel. But now, I'm starting to see things differently. Emma, she's not the person I thought she was. And I'm not sure about anything anymore." Sarah's heart beat faster. This was it. This was the opening she had been waiting for. "Ryan, you deserve to be happy," she said, her words full of sincerity. "You've been struggling for so long, trying to make everything work, trying to keep things together. But sometimes we need to let go of the past to move forward. You've been holding on to a relationship that isn't making you happy anymore. And I want you to know that I'm here for you, that I'm here to help you find what you're truly looking for." Ryan's eyes softened as he listened to Sarah's words. For a moment, there was silence between them. But then, slowly, he nodded. He was still unsure, but the way Sarah spoke, with such conviction and warmth, made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of hope, of possibility. Maybe there was a way forward after all. Maybe Sarah was right. But even as Sarah felt the victory beginning to slip into her grasp, she knew she had to be patient. This wasn't the moment where everything would suddenly fall into place. It would take time for Ryan to fully understand his feelings and make a decision. But Sarah had played her part perfectly. She had planted the seed of doubt in his mind, and now all she had to do was let it grow. The next few days were tense but filled with anticipation. Ryan seemed more withdrawn than ever, But Sarah didn't let that discourage her. She knew that sometimes people needed time to process their emotions before they could make a decision. She had given him the opening, and now it was just a matter of waiting. She continued to offer him her support, her understanding, knowing that little by little she was drawing him closer. Emma had no idea what was happening. She continued to live her life, completely unaware of the changes taking place in her home. Sarah knew that eventually Emma would find out. And when that moment came, it would be too late for her to do anything about it. By then, Ryan would be too far gone, caught up in a new life, one that Sarah had carefully crafted for herself. The days following Ryan's moment of uncertainty were filled with silence and waiting. Sarah could feel the tension hanging in the air between them. She had planted the seed, and now it was just a matter of time before it grew into something more. As each day passed, she observed Ryan closely, watching for signs that he was ready to make a decision. He had become more distant from Emma, and their conversations had slowed to a trickle. It was clear that he was still struggling with the emotional weight of it all, but Sarah knew that he was also starting to see things more clearly. One afternoon, Ryan called Sarah and asked if they could meet. His voice was heavy with a sense of finality, but Sarah didn't feel fear. She felt anticipation. She knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. She agreed to meet him at a small cafe they had frequented in the past, the place where they had shared so many conversations. When Sarah arrived, she found Ryan sitting at a corner table, his head down, deep in thought. As soon as he saw her, he stood up, a mixture of nervousness and determination in his eyes. "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began, his voice quiet. "About Emma, about what I've been holding on to, and about us. I've realized that the life I've been living isn't the one that makes me happy anymore. Emma, I don't think we can go back to what we were." Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her expression calm, masking the excitement bubbling inside her. "Ryan," she said gently, her voice warm and understanding, "sometimes we have to make difficult decisions to find happiness. You've been through so much, and you deserve to live a life that feels right for you. I'm here for you, no matter what." Ryan looked at her, his eyes searching hers, looking for the reassurance he needed. "I don't want to hurt anyone, but I can't keep pretending. I can't stay in a relationship that doesn't make sense for me anymore. And I know that's going to be hard for Emma, but I have to do what's best for me." Sarah reached out, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "I'll be here for you, Ryan, every step of the way." Ryan looked at her for a moment longer before nodding. It was as if he had finally made peace with his decision. "I'm going to talk to Emma. I need to tell her the truth. But I want you to know that I've already made up my mind. I want to build something new, something that feels right for me. And I want that with you, Sarah." The words were exactly what Sarah had hoped to hear, but she didn't show it. Instead, she smiled and squeezed his hand. "I'm here for you, Ryan. Take your time with Emma, but know that I'll be here when you're ready." Over the next few days, Ryan confronted Emma. He told her everything, about his feelings, about the distance that had grown between them, and about his decision to move on. Emma, devastated by the news, didn't know how to react. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her perfect life, the life she had worked so hard to maintain, was falling apart in front of her. But Sarah knew that Emma would eventually have to accept it. It was too late to change Ryan's mind now. He had already made his decision. As Ryan and Emma's marriage ended, Sarah stood by his side, offering him the support and understanding he needed. And slowly, their connection grew even stronger. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt along the way. But Sarah knew she had made the right choice. She had taken the life she had always wanted. And now, with Ryan by her side, she could finally begin to build the future she had dreamed of. But even as she moved forward, there was a part of Sarah that couldn't help but feel a little guilt. She had taken everything: Emma's husband, Emma's life, and even the role of mother to Emma's son. But the guilt was fleeting, overshadowed by the sense of victory she felt. She had finally gotten everything she wanted, and no one could take that away from her now. In the end, Sarah had won. She had taken what she wanted, and now she and Ryan could begin their new life together, free from the past and ready to face whatever the future held.